All right. Hello there, Jess. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thanks so much. This is exciting.
I normally have my headphones on. It doesn't really matter on Riverside, thankfully, because they have the echo cancellation. But I feel like naked on this podcast right now because normally I have those big podcaster headphones. So I'm glad to be here with you, though. I appreciate you coming on because, I mean, it's a long story for anyone that's listening, but really short notice. And I appreciate you hopping on as someone that's like new, fresh. We've never talked to you before. Jess is, in fact, an FDN-P, a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. So not only are we going to dive into her story a little bit today, we're actually going to talk about anxiety in kids. And I know that if you're a regular listener, you understand the first time I bring someone on, it's typically just about their story. But I think this topic is so important. I love that you brought it up. I'm in that space myself, both in the functional space and just mental health space when it's not related to functional medicine. And I think everyone could, there's no way that the people listening right now do not know someone, if not relevant in their own life, that needs this message. So let's get started though with the story. I'd like to know, how did Jess even get into this? What were your first health symptoms? Because I know that you were, I mean, in your bio it says you were a teacher, and so I'm guessing that came before the FDN. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I got here. It's maybe a little bit of a different story from other folks you have on here, because it really wasn't about my own health crash at all. It was about what I was seeing going on around me. And yeah, I was a teacher for a lot of years. I've always wanted to work with kids. I've always been super interested in like what makes a person tick, like what helps a kid grow into their best self. And so I worked in a variety of capacities in different ways with kids, with all kinds of kids. I mean, kids, street kids, upper class kids, private school kids, substance abuse kids, like the whole gamut. And then that eventually brought me into the classroom where I taught high school for a number of years. And it was when I was teaching high school, first of all, I became exhausted, because it's, kudos out there to anyone who is a teacher right now. It is an exhausting job. It is full of passion but at the same time, it's a difficult environment to live in and to work in. So I was teaching school for a long time, and there was this one moment I actually had my first baby and then went back to school in more of an administrative capacity. And I was working at a private school at the time, so we had a headmaster, not a principal, but I was talking to him in his office, and he dropped this like casual comment that about 60% of the kids in our school were on some kind of medication. And we knew that because it was a boarding school. So we had a school nurse and she was doling out the meds. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I was like, what? How is that possible that more kids than not needed something? Sometimes it was as simple as a laxative because they couldn't poo, or sometimes it was, a psych med because they were, they had aggressive tendencies or something like that. So it ran the gamut, but they needed, more kids than not needed a medication to get through their day. And I was stunned by this. And I'd always been really interested in health and nutrition and just lifestyle stuff. And so I decided like to take a sabbatical because I was kind of exhausted and I had a new baby, and just, it was the right time to take a sabbatical. And I decided to go back to school to study nutrition. And so I became a holistic nutritionist, registered holistic nutritionist. And that's when I was like my mind, like I learned about toxins, I learned about gut health, I learned about all of the forces that impact how we feel, not only in our bodies, but how we feel in our minds. And I was like, I didn't know any of this as a teacher. I was like, if I had known this as a teacher, that there was like all this stuff going on, this chaos, like what FDN calls metabolic chaos, going on in their bodies, I would think differently about, their anxiety and their ADHD and their, like literally I would have kids like throwing themselves against the wall and throwing themselves against the chairs because what I understand now is like they needed that pressure. Anyway, so I started understanding kids very differently when I started to understand the insides of them. And then I got really interested in like, okay, how can we dig further and like look in the windows through these functional lab tests? And that took me to FDN. That's my story.
Okay, cool. Well, this is unique. I actually, for those that don't know, I mean, why would they? Jess and I have like not particularly crossed paths in our careers as FDNs, right? I mean, I've seen your name, but this is kind of cool to get to dissect this because that is unique. Almost universally, I can actually count like 2 other people who have gotten on this show that didn't have these very personal health stories of extreme stuff. So I actually admire that greatly, that you saw pain in someone else's life and were willing to figure this out for them. I mean, that's kind of cool because you're fighting for these people that don't even know you're fighting for them. That's kind of an amazing thing to go and choose to do with one's life. What I'm curious about, because I see it as well, I don't know if you know this about me, I speak in schools. That's my job outside of FDN. So I go do these motivational talks for mental health. I don't necessarily talk about the functional side because my goal really there is to try to get them to understand that there's hope. If I'm being blunt about it, I wouldn't necessarily say this directly in a school, but what I'm really trying to get them to avoid is drug overdoses and suicide attempts, right? I want the most extreme cases of this to be avoided. How we heal is going to be pretty unique to everyone. I mean, there's people who have been severely abused and might not have ever gotten that trauma resolved. And of course, we both know they'd be better off with, a good nutrition plan. But at the same time, if they don't ever get that addressed properly, all the nutrition in the world is only going to ever do so much. So it's a very complicated topic. But when 60% of kids in a school are on a medication, it does not take a health professional to use their head and realize, okay, something about that doesn't add up. What I'm curious about, though, is how did you initially make the connection? Like, why did you go do nutrition? Because, and I mean this seriously, some people have very limited views about what might be causing health issues. Maybe they think it's kids on social media. Maybe they think it's kids not exercising. So how did you come to the conclusion that I should go study nutrition?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's interesting. I've reflected on this quite a bit. It's also, like, it's interesting to me that I didn't go into special education, right? It's like I didn't want more educational tools. I didn't want more things to talk about. I wanted to understand their bodies. And I don't know what it was intuitively. I mean, I'd always been really interested in food, and I saw how these kids were eating, and I saw how they were sleeping. And I had a particular vantage point because it was a boarding school. And so I guess there's something in there. I was like, this is all connected somehow. I didn't quite understand how, but yeah, it's interesting to me that I went the nutrition route. I'm glad that I did, but it was a hunch. I think it was a hunch.
Well, this is where your story is not so dissimilar. And I kind of asked for that reason. And I didn't know if it was going to be that answer, but I'm glad it was. One of the things that I've noticed, Jess, is when I ask people on this show, now they're dealing with their own personal health issues, I ask them how they ended up going kind of against Western medicine, because for the average person, it's so hard to comprehend how tough of a decision this actually is if someone hasn't been through it, like yourself in your own way, or another guest on this show, because you are being told by people who are put on top as like the smartest, some of the most educated, highest income earning people that you could possibly be in society, doctors. You have to go against them as probably a lay person. And that goes against everything we've ever been taught since day one. That doesn't really make sense to do that. And so I'm really impressed when people can do that. But when I ask them, what made you go to a more natural approach? The number one answer by far, 90% plus on this podcast in 180 something episodes, is I just felt that it made sense. I had a gut feeling. My intuition told me. And I think there's something to be said about that, especially in this space. It seems to happen all the time. Yeah. I'm not saying don't listen to your doctors. That's insane. But if something's not working, or there's clearly like a problem, like Jess noticed, hey, 60% of kids on a medication, that's an objective way of showing that something's not working. That's when we want to follow that intuition. All right, if something's not working, it must be something else. Where do I go? And it's learning to listen to that inner voice. And that took me a while, but now that's something that kind of guides me within my own life.
Well,
How did,
if I can add in,
you were going and I guess learning about these more holistic things. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add in that, like,
we have a delay, guys. Sorry.
as a teacher, we were really frustrated, and we would talk about this in our meetings. And I should put the caveat out there that we had a particularly difficult cohort of kids, right? The kids that came to our school, they needed something else. So it was maybe a little bit of a skewed, in terms of demographics and statistics. But we spent a ton of time talking about, like, how do we help these kids feel better and connect, and a lot of emphasis on relationships. And as a teacher, it was really frustrating because when all of our tools weren't working, our only recourse was medication, like was to send them into the medical system, either to like psychoanalysis or in, medication or what have you. And I felt really frustrated by that, because I was like, I think there's something else happening. And parents were really frustrated by that too, because every parent that I speak to, like, they don't want to put their kid on meds. They will if they have to, like they want to do the right thing for their kid, but they all want to know their options. And so, that's what's really driving me is to help parents, teachers, therapists, doctors, like anybody who's interested in the well-being of kids themselves, understand what their options are in the variety, all the various options that they have, so that they can make an educated choice and they can choose something that fits with what they feel is best.
The health show that I was doing before I started doing this for FDN, the tagline was leveling the playing field around physical and mental health. And I think what you just described it should be the mission of all of us, right? It's not being against medication. It's not being against counselors or anything like that, because we just acknowledged already there's a unique time and place for any of those things, if not a combination of them. But when someone does not even realize that there are alternative options out there, that's not a level playing field. If you tell the kid, I had a good friend that passed away from a drug overdose. He dealt with abuse, some really extreme stuff as a child. If I told him to do what I do, which is like, catch sunrise every day, I wear my blue light glasses, I eat paleo and stuff like that, that's almost insulting for someone who's dealt with that. But similarly, for someone like me who had a pretty decent life, to just say, oh, well, yes, you're deficient in Zoloft, that's equally as insulting. And we might need a life jacket initially. Reed Davis talks about that in the course. That is okay. We got to keep people afloat. But the fact of the matter is this, Jess, I was offered the Zoloft, I was offered the Xanax, and there was nothing else. It was, here's this life jacket, that's great, but we're never going to help pull you out of the water in any other way or tell you anything about this. And it's usually because these people don't know. I'm not suggesting that they're hiding something, but they don't know it themselves. Most doctors don't look like they're sitting on the fountain of youth in their back office. They look just as sick as the rest of us. So when you were learning about this nutrition stuff initially, you said you learned about gut health and all these different things. Was there anything in particular that was just, I don't know, like, I guess shocking? Like, I never even considered this before? Because I know for me, like, when I first heard about the gut-brain connection, that was a revolutionary concept to myself at the time. So I'm just curious if there was any like shocking things that were ahas for you, connecting the dots for why 60% of these kids might have been on meds.
Yeah, I mean, I think intuitively I kind of knew. I think there's something up with the processed foods. Like that wasn't a shocker to me, that processed foods are bringing literally messages of danger into our bodies and keeping our nervous system all revved up. The gut brain connection was, I kind of knew a little bit about it, but the extent to which like the messages, the highway of messages that are going from the gut to the brain, some from the brain to the gut also. So I always have to put that in there, that like, 20% of the messages going from the brain to the gut, but 80% going from the gut to the brain. That really helped me, because it helped me understand that it's a bidirectional thing. So like the way it helped me understand that these kids are really stuck in a vicious cycle, right? How you think affects your gut, and then what's going on in your gut affects how you think. So like you're stuck. So that was a big one. And then I think the biggest one though was the impact of chemicals and toxicity. That one was massive. And the profound effect of just this toxic soup that we're trying to raise our kids in, and how it's impacting our mitochondria, how it's impacting how, again, it's a vicious cycle, because the higher your toxic load, the more impaired your detox capacity becomes. So you get stuck at this vicious cycle. So I think those were two biggies. But really what it helped me understand was that big picture, biology, psychology, and environment they all need to be taken into account if you really want to feel well. And to compartmentalize it doesn't make any sense.
Right. And we'll talk more a little bit about the specifics and the toxicity in a bit. I just wanted to know that that the answer to that question first. One thing I want to rewind to, because it's always an interesting part to me, and I think the audience as well, is we talked about the summarized version of how you ended up getting to FDN, but I'm curious about more maybe specifics. Like, so when you said you studied nutrition, I'm guessing that was a formal maybe college thing. Like, how long did it take to get to FDN, and what was the appeal to you about this? What resonated with you when you were reading about the course or maybe watching videos?
Well, I started because I was a new mom, and I started with nutrition because all of a sudden I was like, holy cow, I have to keep this kid healthy. And I was a teacher also. So I was seeing what was happening to kids. I was like, kids are disintegrating. And now I have this little baby and I got to do the right thing. And how do I do this? And I was looking around and I was like, someone guide me. And that took me to nutrition school, which was a college level thing. And that's when I started to see this whole other perspective for how I could help moms like navigate this tricky business of feeding their own families, but then also this, like, how we can help kids by bringing this perspective to everybody who's trying to help them. And that was in 2007. And so I did that work for, I don't know, I'm losing my math, but I did it for at least 10 years of just like helping parents understand how to feed their kids. Just this purely nutrition. Like when I was feeding babies, I was teaching about feeding babies. When I was feeding toddlers, I was teaching about feeding toddlers. And, there was a lot of allergy stuff in there, food sensitivity stuff in there. And a lot of elimination diet type of things. I would work alongside naturopathic doctors often to kind of do the food piece when they were doing the strategy stuff. And then I found out, I'm not sure how I found FDN. I think it was on my radar for quite a while because I was aware of all of the tests because I was working with naturopathic doctors who were doing them. So I understood them. But then I was like, I want to go deeper into this because I was still noticing that people were using the tests as treatment guidelines instead of like how FDN does it, which is like as a full package. Like you can't just run one test. And I mean, you talk about this all the time. It's like your tests are windows into the body. So, if you look from one perspective, you'll see one story of what's going on in there. And then you need a couple of other perspectives to get a full picture of what's going on in there. And that can really guide your decisions. And for parents who are exhausted and maxed out and stressed out and like already, dealing with their own hormone issues and all that, we really need to make their plans efficient and like dial them into where they're going to get big bang for their buck in terms of their energy. So, all their resources. So that's what really drew me to FDN was like, I think this is a way that we can really like hone in on quickest on which leverage points parents can use with their kids.
All right, cool. So you're a veteran. I mean, you've been doing this for a while. Again, I want to go back to what I said in the beginning. I think as someone who dealt with this as a kid, I was super anxious, panic attacks, substance abuse. I mean, I was struggling and I didn't end up leaving school until 2013. I didn't even graduate high school because of this. And to know that in 2007, there's already people out there like you that were recognizing these things and actually doing something about it. I commend you for that because I'm thinking about it now and I feel like this would be a better received message. Like, people kind of get it now or whatever. That last 15 years, no, there's a significant social change in how people would have looked at something like that, or your willingness to like leave teaching and then go do that. That's pretty impressive. How, before we even talk about the specific things maybe that get recommended to these families, what I think everyone is going to be wondering that's listening, because I know that we have a predominantly female audience, not exclusive, but predominantly female. If they're moms or soon to be moms, one of the first things they're going to wonder is how on earth are you navigating this modern world where the kid goes to school and gets the craziest foods in the world, or they go over their friend's house and they see what their friends are eating? Because I feel like with your experience, you've probably learned a thing or two about these habit changes that are necessary for the families. So without even talking about like the what they have to eat or don't or not eat, how do you get a family on board with this and get them to get the kids on board when the entire world is against us for this?
Yeah, well, that is a challenge, and I'm not gonna pussyfoot around it. It is a challenge, and one way that I do it is that about, I guess it was 2015 or so, I stopped clinical work. I stopped where I was working in a brick and mortar office, and I went online. And by going online, I can now talk to parents all over the world, and I can bring them together in groups. And I, it makes all the difference when you know that you're not alone and the world's not against you. Even if it's only a small group of like a couple of people who show up to, like, I mean, I've got a group of people, and we do office hours every week. In a Zoom room, we get together and we talk about implementation struggles, and we talk about like, okay, what do you do? What do you do when this happens? What do you do when that happens? And so whoever wants to come can come, and sometimes it's 5 people, sometimes it's 10 people, sometimes it depends on who's available. But just to know that there are a couple of people out there who understand what you're going through makes all the difference to your own resolve that this is important. So I split it up for the families that I work with to say, okay, we're gonna do an investigative piece. We're gonna learn a lot about your child's body. That I can promise you. Like at the end of the time, we are gonna know what is going on in their body through the FDN labs and all that. Then there's the implementation piece, which I can make no guarantees about because I don't know their kids, I don't know their family. We will absolutely help them. We will help them, and we will motivate them, and we do implementation challenges, and we get them focused on the things. But sometimes parents tell me that it's like, okay, I know this piece is important, but I can't implement it right now. And I'm like, okay, cool. You can't do that right now. We're going to come back to it. We're not going to we're going to put it on the shelf. We're not going to drop it because this is an important piece of your child's physiology. We're going to come back to it, and we're going to start somewhere else. So, that's, I think what it comes down to is we have to find a starting point. We have to have the big picture plan, and then we have to figure out where the starting point is. And it's different for each family.
Fair enough. And I like that group aspect because I think that's what FDN obviously does this on a large scale, but I think that's what FDN provides to so many people is that if I go out and just walk through the grocery store today, I would feel very isolated in what I do. And yet, thankfully, I'm lucky enough to live in this bubble where I go on my Facebook or Instagram, and because I'm so connected with all of you guys, I feel like all I see is cool health stuff or posts about this or that or the next thing. And yeah, that's just not everyone's reality. In fact, it's not the majority's reality. So that group dynamic and just knowing that other parents are going through it and maybe tips and tricks that they learned, that's very valuable. Now, I want to get into some of the specifics because I'm fascinated by this, especially. Oh, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, like in the business world, how we talk about, you are the sum of the 5 people you hang out most with. And they rub off on you, which is exactly I have found to be true. It's the same thing with health and wellness. Like if you can surround yourself with people who have the same values as you and the same, motivations as you and some of the same problems as you and the same struggles as you, you're much more likely to have success.
Absolutely. I love that you brought that up. That's one of my favorite, not a quote per se, but like a principle of that. And it's something you have to constantly remind yourself with, because if I'm stagnant in one or more areas of my life, I need personal responsibility for that, of course. But I also look at like, okay, well, what are the 5 people around me doing? Oh, shockingly, they're all doing the same thing or they're stuck in the same spot. So you got to change the environment and then watch yourself change. And we're slowly pushing that. We have our little core group of health freaks in the functional space, and we'll slowly infect the rest of them with this good message of health.
It is
getting into the specifics. I'm curious.
Sorry, we have a delay. It is changing so much. I just want to put that out there.
I apologize, by the way. We're not. This delay is so bad. It won't come up in the edit, so they'll just think we're like stupid. But for us, it's terrible. So we apologize. We're doing our best.
Well, I just wanted to say that the tides are changing. Like they really are. People are more interested. I think having 10 years, just going back to the gut brain thing, having like more than 10 years of solid research on that, people are starting to come around. I'm starting to get, even some doctors are being like, maybe you should go talk to Jess. I'm starting to get, teachers interested. How can I talk to the parents about this stuff without being, stepping on people's toes? So people honestly, like, I still feel like people want to do right by kids. They want kids to thrive. They want kids to do well. They want information, and the ears are open.
Absolutely. What are some of the maybe most common things or just themes that you're seeing on the lab testing that you're utilizing? Because I know that we talked about toxicity. I also understand that everyone's individualized, but I have found that this question has merit because when someone serves 40-year-old women that are dealing with certain conditions, I found that there's patterns there, or maybe hyper athletic males, there's patterns there. So is there something that's coming up a lot for these kids with the tests that you're utilizing?
Yeah, there's 5 main things that are coming up all the time. I've kind of boiled it down to that. There's nutrient imbalances, there's food reactions, there's toxicity, which we've talked about, and usually the toxicity stuff is paired with compromised detox pathways, and usually there's a genetic piece going on there. There's gut imbalances we've already talked about. And in some cases, there's infections, whether those are infections in the gut or those are things like, strep and staph and things like that are putting pressure. All these things, like all they're doing is they're adding more stress to an already stressed out body, right? Like FDN is all about uncovering hidden stress, right? And I wrote a book called Raising Resilience back in 2016. And this was way before I discovered FDN. And that was my goal with that book, was to help parents go beneath diagnosis and understand their kids through the lens of stress. What FDN helped me understand more specifically was how stress impacts the body. And what I'm most interested in how it affects the nervous system. So I kind of took the hidden stress acronym that FDN uses and translated it into what I see specifically for anxiety and mood and learning issues in kids. And those are the things I'm seeing repeatedly, particularly the gut ones. And nutrient imbalances, those are big. I'm seeing a lot of copper toxicity. I'm seeing a lot of zinc deficiency. I'm seeing a lot of mineral imbalances. And yeah, it becomes so evident when you see it on paper, and a ton of food reactions and gut problems.
Right. I think this is where the labs are very applicable because people need to see these objective things sometimes to get motivated. And I think, I would imagine, at least as a parent, I'm not one, but if I'm seeing my kids' lab results and I can see, whoa, these things are really messed up, and I know I'm having these behavioral issues or whatever it might be, physical health issues too, then yeah, I think that's very motivating. So I love the lab tests for that reason, because yes, the implementation might be hard, but if there's something about knowing it objectively that kind of helps you push through tougher times, or maybe you fall off the wagon, but you get on a little quicker than you would have had someone just recommended something loosely without any objective proof that that person actually needed that recommendation. It's easier to fall off because you're like, well, I don't even know about this anyway, versus the food sensitivities one, I would say, is one of the biggest motivators, right? When you can see that you're reacting to a food, that's black and white. Either you are or you aren't. Either it's severe or it's, really non-existent. And it's tough every time to go eat that food or serve your child that food when you know that this is going to kind of tick them off a little bit. Because I'm assuming that you're working with parents in public, or that have kids in public schools as well. And I know we already kind of discussed the implementation thing, but I'm trying to think about this. Like, is it really practical to get kids to change their behavior even in public schools? Like, is that something that's happening, or is that just really something that's a huge barrier that you just have learned to navigate? Because I feel like that'd be one of the biggest concerns from the people listening, is this idea of, all right, well, I can control my kid all the time, and then they go to school, and then that's it. Like, that surpasses even the other implementation question I asked. Like, that's just a totally really tough thing.
It is a really tough thing. We talk about it a lot. I'd say a couple of things. One is that just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worth doing. So, I tell parents, like, you need to know this information, because the more information you have about your child, the more you can make constructive decisions on their behalf. And the more you can enter into a positive, constructive conversation with other people. Like, there was a time when, like, talking about ADHD meds in school from between a teacher and a parent was like a kind of taboo thing, or like, hey, I think you should go to a psychiatrist kind of thing. Now it's like, you walk in any school, there's like noise canceling headphones, and there's like quiet spaces, and there's like, people understand about neurodiversity, and they understand about food allergies. Like, so this is just another one of those things. Like, there is a lot of work we need to do. I love talking to teachers. I love talking to teachers about this stuff, about some of the things, because it's still teachers are in a very awkward position when they are maybe like a very health-minded teacher and they're seeing junk come in the lunches. Like, how do you have that conversation with the parent without blaming the parent for, whatever they're choosing? So it's a very tricky situation. But on the flip side, there are some things that teachers can be aware of, bringing any kind of food into schools, or having snacks or birthday celebrations, things like that could be a little bit more inclusive for kids. It's changing. It is definitely changing over the last 10 years. People like gluten sensitivity is almost as common as peanut allergy in the lexicon of teachers, right? So it's not taken as seriously because it's not life-threatening the way anaphylaxis is, but they're open to conversations. But we have a lot of work to do to change the culture of schools to be one that is more health promoting and more conducive to kids taking care of their own health. Absolutely. But doesn't mean we can't try.
Yeah. I mean, hey, we wouldn't be on this podcast today if I didn't believe in it. I always, it's a side story, but I have a friend. He's absolutely brilliant. He's very aware of like a lot of the crazy things going on in the world, and he just kind of gets locked up in them and starts thinking about them. And we talk about that together. And I still have a pretty optimistic outlook on this world. And he asked me, how the heck are we talking about the same thing and yet you have this optimistic outlook? And I asked him one day, I said, do you think there is even, and I said, don't give me a hard time, answer me honestly. Do you think there is at least, bottom line at least, a 1% chance of us figuring this stuff out? And Jess, we're talking about things from the issues with kids to environmental issues, like all this kind of stuff, right? I said, do you think there's a 1% chance at least? He's like, well, yeah, there's probably more than that. I said, cool, man, then we better get to work, right? Like, if it's 0, I'm going to be miserable with you too. And then we can just continue to pout all day. But if you give me a 1% chance, Evan Transu's going to run after that. Like, let's get to work. And especially it's a shame that sometimes the most brilliant people get disabled by this stuff, because I'm like, do we need your brain? Like, one person can invent something really cool that helps fix this stuff, especially the more complicated issues in this world. Now, with this, I'm actually... So especially since you've worked with teachers as someone who was teaching at one point, how do you even recommend, like, is there any recommendations, I should say, for the teachers to be able to, or schools rather, I guess, to be able to address these issues? Because that's my thing, is like, I go into these schools, the teachers sometimes, if I do like a parent talk, they'll be there and they'll get to hear about my natural stuff, because I talk more to the parents about that side, right? I might leave it out with the kids a little bit, but the parents I talk to, and they say, oh, this is great, this is awesome. How the heck do we get the school to like change and do the stuff that's necessary? So I don't know whether it's like a special food company I can recommend that maybe serves some better stuff for kids or what, but I'm curious about what recommendations you'd like to see implemented in a school or that you've seen work in the past.
That is a big question, Evan. And I wish I had a straightforward solution. I would say we have a systemic problem in schools. And, because in public schools, I mean, there's so much bureaucracy and big picture stuff that happens that really hampers what individuals can do but we need some cultural change. I mean, I did work with one school on, they hired me they needed a healthy eating plan and they wanted to they wanted a healthy eating policy. That's what they wanted. And I was like, listen, you guys, like, a healthy eating policy is not going to fly if you don't have a healthy culture in your school. Like, you need a health culture in your school, because it's not just about eating. Like, you can't tell a parent to stop getting their kids granola bars in their lunch if you're going to sell cotton candy at the fair. Like, it just doesn't jive, right? So you need a healthy school policy more than a healthy food policy, so that everybody who comes into that school comes into a culture that is supportive of healthy child development. And we're a long ways off of that. And sadly, it's really private schools that have the capacity to really create that, because they have total control over their community. Public schools is going to take a long time. I think that's what everyone wants. Everyone wants health for kids. Everyone wants it to be a healthy environment. But I'm not seeing a whole lot of like strategic, multifaceted plans to say, okay, here's here, like everything from social media to technology, to food, to how we talk about kids, to curriculum, like all of that stuff. It's huge. I mean, we're going big picture here. The way I do it in my little ecosystem, my little roadmap that I have for families is I say, listen, we're going to learn about your child's body first and foremost, so that we can figure out what the leverage points are, that we can help them feel better. But there are 5 things that every child needs, regardless of whatever we find out in the lab testing. Like, they need real food, they need clean air and clean water, they need restorative sleep, they need movement and play, and they need connection and a sense of purpose. And so we work on those things. We talk about, we help the parents talk to their kids about, like, which of those do you find interesting? Like, where can we work there, so that they can learn to take care of themselves? And then we, figure out all of the hidden pressures and all that stuff through the lab testing. So I would love to see more of that kind of stuff be integrated into school curriculum, to be like, hey, what's your health plan for this year, or this week or this month, like, however, depending on the age level of the kid. Yeah.
I think too, I appreciate you humoring my big picture questions, by the way, because I'm always just trying to, like, see it, like, because I know it can happen, but it's going to take a little bit. And so any little piece of advice I can get, I'll take, because I hate leaving these teachers with nothing when they ask me, what can we do in the schools? And I'm like, I mean, obviously, let's start with the healthy habits, but sometimes you don't even know where to start. And I think the other problem is here too, it's not even like the schools are just blatantly neglecting these people and not telling them this stuff. It's that they don't know it either. It's the same issue with the doctors. It's not like the doctor that was recommending Xanax and Zoloft to me was hiding the real secret behind their desk. They didn't know either. They were, and I'm not saying this in a judgmental way, I'm just saying it in a health way. They didn't look particularly healthy. They were very overweight, very pale. They looked exhausted. They got the bags under their eyes. I mean, this was not someone that was lying to me and using something in the back. And so I think that's the problem. It's, they say what the first step in fixing a problem is identifying that there is one and recognizing that there is one. I don't even know that that's the obvious recognized problem when we see the behavioral issues in kids nowadays. A lot of it's been blamed to COVID. I'm in the schools. I definitely saw the increase due to COVID, but there was a lot going on before, guys. I'm like, there's a ton of stuff happening that had nothing to do with COVID. And so now, unfortunately, as much recognition is being given to the mental health side, there's the people like myself that actually dealt with this for nutritional reasons or whatever else, which is millions and millions of kids. It's almost getting swept under the rug because we think, oh, well, it's COVID and it's this times. It's like, well, no, it doesn't really have to be this way. And I think that's powerful that you mentioned focusing on this, those 5 things first, right? Like, are they getting good sleep? Are they getting clean air and clean water? Because I'm sure you've seen this since you actually work pretty much exclusively with them. Kids respond so quickly to when they get the right things. I mean, adults can respond pretty fast. A kid, it could be a 2-day transformation sometimes. They're not in perfect health. I don't want to speak ignorantly here and someone get me wrong that's listening, but you'd be surprised how fast a kid can change when they are actually given the things that, shockingly, a kid was meant to have, right?
Yep. Yeah. And to bring it down to something really practical, I think the thing with teachers and parents is they want management tools. Like, when I tell parents that, like, for every one gluten symptom that is digestive, there are 8 that are neurological, right? Like, that the number one tissue in the body that gluten likes to attack is the brain tissue. Like, that's like, oh, okay, we're going to give this a shot. And I have literally had people go off gluten, like take their kid off gluten for a while. And like, the teachers think that they're on medication because there's that much of a profound shift. It doesn't happen all the time. Like, that's not always the thing. There's very rarely like one answer to what's going on. But, not a lot of people know that. Not a lot of people, and still even specialists who understand celiac disease don't understand the extent to which it can affect the brain and the nervous system. So I just think it's about, getting this out there. The more people who have success with this, the more, I mean, when parents go through my program and they like have their kid on the other side, they're like telling everybody, they're like, oh my gosh, everyone needs to know this. because yeah, it's a rocky road to try to figure it out and trying this and trying that, but when you come out the other end of it, the more people who have success with it, the more it's going to become more mainstream and more. I mean, I imagine a time when talking about someone's food when they struggle with something, neurological or in mental health is just as common as it now is to talk about, smoking cessation when you have a chronic cough, or, these things take time to
Yeah.
become normalized, but that's what the work you and I are doing, is to get it more out there so that it becomes normalized.
Bingo. And that's why I love the privilege to get to do this, because I do think I love the saying facts tell, stories sell. And it's not that we're selling anything in particular, right? But we're selling an idea, a way of living, a concept. And I could give people all the facts. I actually thought that was fascinating about for every one digestive symptom, there's 8 neurological ones. I did not know that. But some people don't really resonate with that as much. When you hear how a life is transformed, that's something that sticks with people 20, 30 years later sometimes. And that leads me to my next question here. As someone who's been doing this for so long, I can only imagine the stories that you have. So we can, if you want to do like even 2 or 3, that's fine, but one's also okay. It's up to you. I'm just curious, like, are there any client testimonials that really stick out, like maybe a totally troubled kid and then you were able to come in and do this work and just kind of transform things for the family? I'm very curious about that.
Well, I mean, it's always a mix, right? Because there's information and there's implementation, right? So I'm just going to be straight up and honest and say I have had people where we find out a lot about a kid. There's like all kinds of things going on, but we work for months and months and months to get the kid to buy in, to take the supplements and to do the changes. So there is that side of thing, but I've also had kids, particularly the really sensitive kids, who just want to feel better. When there's even just that little glimmer in them of just like, I just wish I didn't fly off the handle all the time. I just, or they'll I have one kid in particular I'm thinking of who was very volatile. Like he would just lose it and get kind of aggressive, but then he would like take himself away and then he'd come back and have this like remorseful moment of just like, oh, I just don't want this anymore. And we found out that he was extremely sensitive to gluten. He had a lot of intestinal permeability. Corn was a big deal too, and dairy was a big deal too. His digestive system was messed up. He had a lot of dysbiotic growth, a lot of opportunistic bacteria running the show in his gut, and he had really high pyrroles as well, which is something that I've started testing for as well. These are compounds that come out in the urine and they leach zinc and B6, and so when you have chronic deficiency of zinc and B6, it's really hard to create your neurotransmitters, those calming neurochemicals, and so he had that as well. And so, yeah, there was like a perfect storm. And so for him, like he was a teenager. So what we did was I video reviewed the labs with him in mind, because I don't want any kid to feel like they're broken or there's something wrong with them. Like that's not what these tests are telling us. They're just windows into the body, and they're helping us identify the opportunities we can leverage to help them feel better. So so I did that, and he saw it and he was like, oh, like he was just wide-eyed, right? He was like, wow. And so then he was on board. He's like, if this can help me be, he literally said, like, if this can help me be a more productive member of the family, like it was something along those lines. Like this kid was incredible. He just wanted to do right, but he was out of control. He didn't have control over himself. And so, so he was a great success. He took the supplements, he did the things, he started making different choices. He said no to the birthday cakes. Like he was the model, the model kid. Now, like I say, it's not all this cut and dry, but those are the biggest rewards when the kids have an interest. And we always have that conversation, like, how interested in this are you? If they are interested, even the littlest bit, then we bring them into the process and we explain what's going on in their body and how it relates to, how they're feeling and thinking. And often that will help buy them in.
Yeah, that's so cool that he was that interested in it. And I'm not particularly surprised, because the reason I don't talk about the functional stuff always with the kids is because it doesn't relate to everyone in that audience. And I can speak to things that relate to everyone in that audience typically. But with the things I do recommend, like my little steps at the end, right, that are generic but useful nonetheless, kids want to learn, man. They're sponges. Almost sometimes as adults, at least I found in my life, they project their rigidness onto the kids and act like, well, they're not going to want to do that. It's like, no, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, you don't want to do that. Kids are learning all the time. They're changing every single day and every single week. I find that they're some of the most receptive human beings to change with this. And you know what? Especially with the thing of like feeling out of control and ending up in trouble for this, it brings me back to when I was in middle school and high school. I mean, I was getting in trouble for fights. I ended up in a juvenile detention facility. And now I don't want to sit here and excuse my actions. I'm not even advocating this for me per se. But it does beg the question then, if kids are this susceptible to this stuff and they truly feel out of control, I mean, how many people are ending up in the quote unquote system, you know what I mean? Like the juvenile system or something like that, when they're like sensitive to gluten or something similar, right? Because the adults act like crap when they're moody or whatever. Kids, I mean, they might actually do something that really has some serious consequences for them. And I feel like we need to get people thinking about like that kind of thing, right? There's kids' lives that are going to be impacted for the rest of their time here because of something that maybe wasn't even entirely their fault to begin with. I find it hard to believe that I had no role in the things that I did when I was younger. But at a certain point, I mean, a 6-year-old's pretty hard to blame for most of their actions, in my opinion, especially if they're sick and neuroinflamed and feeling like crap all the time. That's a pretty tough way to operate in your life.
Yeah, yeah. And I break it apart to be like there's their stress cup, right? It's like it's all about their stress cup. And there's social stressors, there's environmental stressors, there's biological stressors. And we need to figure out what's filling up their cup. And it could, it'll be a different weight for each kid. But we also have to look at, their genetic capacity to tolerate stress, because that's a thing. Like, I mean, we know epigenetics, and we don't have to get into epigenetics and genetics, but some people just, when they are under stress, they are more likely to show, symptoms of depression or symptoms of anxiety or symptoms of impulsivity because of their genetics. And so then we have to say, okay, so what are your biggest stress triggers? What's filling your cup? And where are our leverage points there? So all of those things need to be taken into account.
Cool. Well, Jess, I think this is a really good opportunity. I hope for you and the things that you're doing. I mean, obviously you've been doing it for a while anyway, but I know that many of the people listen, they're typically coming on for a personal health story. Believe it or not, it's really not that common that we get someone on that is really focusing on the kids. So if people are interested in working with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, everything's at my website, which is my name. So jesssherman.com. There's 3 S's in a row. Sometimes that trips people up. And the program that I bring people through is called the Resilience Roadmap. It's literally a roadmap to stronger stress response, stronger resilience. So that's jesssherman.com/resilience roadmap. So everything's on my website. I have a podcast called the Feeding Families podcast. I have a book called Raising Resilience. But everything can be found from the hub of my website.
Excellent. And of course, we'll have this in the show notes for people, but it's always good to just hear it verbally. But I can't believe 50 minutes completely flew by here today. I want to finish by asking you the signature question on the Health Detective podcast. And I guess this one's kind of tough because we're focusing on families today and focusing on parents. So you can, whether it's a message to parents, kids, or whatever, you can take this however you'd like. But the question normally is, in this case, if I could give you, Jess, a magic wand and you could wave it and get every single person in this world to do one thing for their health. So maybe that's like every single parent or every single kid. It's up to you. What's the one thing that Jess would get them to do?
Oh, there's so many. I should have done my homework so I knew what the question was. I'll tell you, one thing I would wave my magic wand on is to erase mom guilt. Like just erase it from the face of the planet so it does not exist, because guilt does not serve us. And we all think of what we should have done, what we could have done, what we didn't do, what I wish I had done, and what I wish I had known. So that would be gone. And then I think if I can do 2, can I do 2? If I could do 2, one would be to just think have a good solid conversation with your parenting partner about about health and about your vision of health. What is it? What does a healthy family look like to you, feel like to you? What does a healthy child look like and feel like to you? And how close or how far away from that are you right now? And I think, I mean, I tell people that I help people course correct. I just course correct, but you have to first identify that there's something to course correct. So we get so busy, in our lives, and we're just on a treadmill as parents, right? So just having a stop for a sec, take a breath, and think about what the vision of health you have, for what is it that you want for your kids and for your family. And from there, if you have that vision, that's the starting point, because you don't know how to get there, because otherwise you would be there by now. So don't worry about that. Just think about what it is that you want, and then find people who can help. It might not be me, but find people who have a plan in place for how you can get closer to that vision of health. I could do so many more, Evan. There are so many things, but I'll leave it at that.